It's been a long time since NieR Automata came out. And whenever I'm reminded of it, there's a little voice in the back of my head that speaks to me. You're thinking about how much you NieR Automata, aren't you? Now, what word do you think fits there? No, not that word. For me, it was love. For me, it was hate. Only an existential game like NieR Automata could make me suffer an existential crisis trying to review it. As a longtime fan of Platinum's stylish action games, and a longtime fan of Yoko Taro's crazy stories all the way back in Drakengard and NieR, I was absolutely ecstatic when NieR Automata was announced.
Das ist kein Drakengard.
Nein, ja, das ist fucking Yoko Taro, Mann! Und das ist das... Halt der Fresse!
What?
And in a way, I think they nailed it. There was so much I loved about NieR Automata. The crazy existential story with all sorts of philosophical twists and turns, the cool and beautiful characters with elaborate arcs, the fluid and exciting combat both on the ground and in the air, the sheer amount of interesting content and lore nuggets scattered around the desolate, yet gorgeously rendered world, all wrapped in the most incredible soundtrack I've ever heard, continuing the legacy of glorious music from both NieR and Drakengard. But I'm only human after all, and humans are capable of love and hate in equal measures. And in my experience with NieR Automata, there was just as much that I hated about the game that I loved about it. Maybe even more.
It's fascinating, don't you think? What could possibly drive such behavior?
An unfocused, unbalanced difficulty that only served to confuse me on the intended experience, a complete refusal and ignorance of gameplay in the story to focus on the more set-in-stone script they wrote, crowbarred-in RPG mechanics that complicate the encounter design for no good reason and shatter immersion, and repetitive, unevolving gameplay that you're forced to repeat not just once, but multiple times for a full playthrough. Are these issues unique to NieR Automata? No. Were the issues prevalent enough to make me stop playing the game? No. But does this mean that, despite my complaints, I loved the game deep down enough to finish it? Or was I just blinded by hope, admiration of Yoko Taro, and popular opinion that I fooled myself into believing I had not wasted my time? With this video, I've dedicated myself to unraveling this riddle, this bipolar nightmare of love and hate, to figure out where I actually stand. I've always had a love for game design and directors like Yoko Taro, who try to push the video game medium in new directions with their experimental designs, to create experiences that cannot be replicated in other forms of media, like books or film. It's based on this that I'd like to take you through my experience with NieR Automata and what I consider the core game design flaws and successes I had to deal with, how other games approach their design differently, and maybe in the end, we'll figure out my truth. But before we get into it, I'd like to give a spoiler warning. Despite the fact that I'm going to complain about parts of the game's design for a good chunk of time, I still recommend that you play the game first before watching this. I think. This video is intended for people who have played the game, and there are enough parts in the game that are, in my opinion, well designed and worthy of not only the praise they get, but worthy of being seen unspoiled for maximum effect. But we'll get to those parts later on. First, let me take you through what were the flawed parts in my experience, starting with difficulty. When I started NieR Automata, I chose the hard difficulty. This wasn't because I'm a hardcore gamer or anything like that, but rather I was excited about the Platinum-style combat, and I felt I'd have a more ideal experience if it was challenging, as their games usually are. While not every game has to be challenging, I believe that difficulty is a core part of the design, a unique and integral tool in a game designer's kit that can and should be utilized to create the intended experience. Consider a game like Resident Evil 2. If you play it on easy or normal, you could just blast everything in sight. But if you play it on hardcore, the limited resources force you to strategize, to plan routes, to shoot to stun, and so on, creating, to me, the intended survival horror experience. So, it was with this mindset that I went into the game on hard. And then promptly died in the intro. And then I was back on the main menu, and I'd have to do that whole long segment all over again. Not quite the ideal experience I wanted, as it killed the momentum of the game's story by forcing me to redo everything, including rewatching all the cutscenes and dialogue. So, okay, my bad, lesson learned, hard must be for people doing a New Game Plus or something, so I switched it to normal. But now a new problem surfaced. The game was way too easy. Even though it was just one notch down, the game's difficulty plummeted from instant death on hard to me practically never dying on normal. It wasn't just the difficulty level either. Once I got out of the intro, I saw that the game stacks so much in your favor. A bottomless supply of recovery items, overpowered chips, an overly forgiving spammable dodge move, safe long-range attacks, the ability to easily nullify enemy bullets with your own attacks. There's just so many solutions that nothing gets to be a problem. And without problems, you're never pushed to play in an interesting way. Oh no, shields, what am I gonna do? Same thing I do with everything else, slash through it. Unfortunately, I didn't need to learn any of the really cool hidden combos in the game because enemies didn't put up enough of a resistance to warrant it. Similarly, chipsets could have been an interesting way of letting me be creative with building my character to shore up my weaknesses, but I just picked the same overpowered chips that everyone else picked, because why wouldn't you? Seriously, I felt bad for all the bosses I fought. The designers put so much work into giving them unique patterns and intricate movesets, and I could just turn my brain off and mash my way through while guzzling potions.
Nothing matters anymore!
Big whoop, you might say. Just play for the story. But for me, gameplay is a part of the story, and the story was degraded due to the lack of challenge in gameplay, as it ruined any sense of threat that these bosses were supposed to represent.
You cannot defeat me, child.
I am much too powerful for this world.
So, I was stuck in a real Goldilocks situation. Sure, I could switch the difficulty mid-game, but why and how am I supposed to police the difficulty? Either I play on hard, where the combat is challenging and fun, but the story pacing is ruined by constant deaths and punishingly long restarts, or I play on normal, where I never die and never have any fun in combat, but at least the story keeps its momentum going. Either way seemed bad, but I chose what I felt was the lesser of two evils and went with normal, drudging through mediocre gameplay to get to the cool story bits. And while that worked and got me through the game, and I understand that everyone has their own preference for difficulty, I wish it was designed better so that the story and gameplay were in sync instead of working against each other. I felt like the difficulty was unbalanced and needed to be addressed, as it would not only lead to more appreciation for the cool combat, but it would enhance the story as well by making the player focused, by making threats actually feel like threats, and victories feel more satisfying. And there are all sorts of little changes that I think could be done. For example, NieR Automata could take a cue from Monster Hunter by not only limiting your healing items to a small amount, but also imposing an animation to take them, removing the ability to just mindlessly face-tank your way through bosses by guzzling down a potion at any instant. I also feel like you can't appreciate the bullet patterns when the game lets you nullify them so easily with basic attacks. Instead, by only letting you nullify bullets with emergency special moves like bombs, bullet hell games like Hellsinker create a wonderfully beautiful and exciting ballet of offense and defense where you weave through the bullets while you fire back. You can actually see some of this design in the hacking segments for NieR Automata. Not only did I enjoy the chiptune music for those segments, I enjoyed the fact that you couldn't nullify all the bullets and there was no healing, meaning I had to be focused. But I think more so than those little changes, I feel there is a bigger issue to address. The designers don't make it clear enough what the ideal difficulty is. I know many of you are probably saying, it's normal difficulty, just like with any game. But look, even the game itself is not sure, stating, the standard, most enjoyable difficulty. Probably. And for the other difficulties, it mainly just talks about auto chips and lock-on, stuff we don't even know anything about yet, so how would we know how that would affect anything? Multiple difficulty options are as much a blessing as a curse when you consider the huge amount of "what difficulty do I play on?" posts for all sorts of games that have these options, and NieR Automata is just another one where you get nothing to make an informed decision.
When I start a game and it has a difficulty slider, it makes me feel stupid to begin with, because I'm like, which one should I actually be doing?
Yeah.
Like, even if it says hard mode, it still might be too easy.
It might not be hard, yeah.
And I'm just like, this is stupid. They should just not ever do that.
It's always weird to think about it too, because you want to figure out in your mind when you're picking a difficulty, like, okay, well, what is the intended way to play this game then? Which one was the one they were probably like designing around?
Yeah.
Because sometimes they design around hard mode. Sometimes they design around the normal mode. Like, it's hard to figure out how you should even pick that sometimes.
There are many examples that NieR Automata could learn from to create a better onboarding process, to instill confidence in a player that they're getting the intended experience. Halo, for example, is much more confident in stating that its hard difficulty, heroic, is the intended difficulty because it wants you to be challenged. Celeste, while allowing you to use assist mode to make things easier, does so with a long message stating that they don't recommend it as it can ruin the intended challenge, to only use it if the game is completely inaccessible otherwise. With games that are fine in separating their story from their challenge, you have Deus Ex and God of War, with their easy and hard difficulties being replaced with give me a story and give me a challenge respectively. And finally, many games remove the confusion from difficulty selection by not having a difficulty selection at all. And this does not even necessarily come at the cost of reducing accessibility. Take Dark Souls as an example, which, while only having one difficulty, offers ways to tweak how hard the game is by using different classes, summoning friends to help, and leveling up for more power. Or how Resident Evil 4 and God Hand dynamically adjust their difficulty on how well you're doing to keep you in the ideal flow state. As alluded to beforehand, I'll admit NieR Automata is in a tricky situation that isn't easily solved, because while I think it would benefit from a more balanced and harder difficulty to increase engagement, That would come at the cost of making my second issue with the game more prevalent: the way it handles death. While most games are fine with treating death as a retry, a rewind, a "that didn't happen,"
Wait. That's not how it happened. No. I did not die in that battle. Let me begin again.
I really appreciated how NieR Automata tried to go the extra mile to treat death as canon, as part of the story, instead of scrubbed from it. It largely emulates the death mechanics from Dark Souls, where when you die, you're rebuilt as a clone, leaving behind your original body as a corpse where you died. No rewinds. But while I like this implementation in Dark Souls since it was built around it, I found that NieR Automata's implementation was, for me, half-baked. Now, whenever I died out in the open world in NieR Automata, everything was hunky-dory. I'd go back and retrieve my corpse, and everything would pick up where I left off for the most part. Made perfect sense with the established rules in the story, and seeing not only my corpse but others littering the ground was a nice touch that really drove home the whole disposable soldiers aspect of the story for me. However, whenever I died to a boss fight, the number one cause of deaths, it just raised a lot of questions. For example, why when I died to Adam and Eve in the alien ship and then came back from being rebuilt, did they act like it was our first time meeting? Why did they feel the need to reintroduce themselves and start their long speech all over? I could understand 2B and 9S repeating themselves because maybe their memories weren't uploaded to that point, so they lost it when they were cloned. But Adam and Eve shouldn't be suffering any memory loss, so why are they repeating? I mean, my body's on the floor. We've clearly done this before. You don't have to introduce yourself anymore. I'm sure you can laugh and say I'm overthinking it, but that confusion happened to me several times over my playthrough. It just felt like NieR Automata didn't go far enough in their implementation of death as canon to keep everything logically consistent. Other games have found great solutions for this kind of situation. In Shovel Knight, a boss will introduce himself when you first meet him, yes. But whenever you die and then come back for another fight, they skip the introduction and instead get right to business. Similarly, in modern Rockstar games like Red Dead Redemption and GTA 5, whenever a conversation is interrupted, it doesn't start it back from the top. They continue where they left off with a quip, like, "Now as I was saying."
Like I was talking about.
And, of course, in Dark Souls, the system they emulate closely, the bosses are guardians that either stay silent or show that they know the whole resurrection deal. So it makes logical sense that they continue to stand guard even when you die and come back.
Leave us, we, Ashen One. Sweep all thought of us from thy mind, as thy kind always have.
Speaking of Dark Souls, there was also the issue of death not replenishing your inventory. For some reason, despite the fact that you're rebuilt based on the last save version of yourself, your inventory was an exception to that, and would remain the same as it was when you died. This meant that if you rely on healing items but you just used them all in your last attempt, then you could be all out and not able to retry. Even worse, there are many instances in NieR Automata, such as when the resistance base is attacked, or when you're in the tower, that you're locked in and unable to retreat to buy items, leaving you up shit creek without a paddle. Look no further than Dark Souls for the solution to this. In that game, your healing items are always replenished so you can get right back into the fight, and you're always respawned in an area where you can retreat to change up your strategy when necessary. There's no good reason the game should force you to quit out and reload your save if you want to get your items back. There are some games like XCOM which use early deaths to prime you for failure, to let you get a feel for the consequences and inevitability of death. I can understand if this was the reasoning behind making dying as 2B in the prologue so punishing. It's getting you ready to suffer the same consequences later on if you don't treat your life carefully. But then why does dying as 9S in his prologue just start you back up from a checkpoint? I mean, thanks. It keeps the flow going, but why all the setup just to discard it? Same thing happens if you die in the tower. You start up from a checkpoint. Again, thanks. But of all the times for it to be actually appropriate for death to result in an ending, this would be it. The bunker's gone, you can't be revived, life is precious. Why not now? Why the inconsistency?
What the fuck were they thinking?
And while we're on that, joke endings. Why, in God's name, do they kick you out to the main menu? You'd expect that, due to the way it rushes through the credits, it would rush you back into the game right before it happened. You know, to brush everything off as a joke. But nope. Get punished. Get punished for running the wrong way as 9S at the beginning of his prologue because you didn't know the right way to go. Back to the main menu with you to go through the entire robot bucket scene all over again. I'm sure that won't take what was a beautifully emotional moment and reduce it into an annoyance by having to repeat it. In general, it seemed like NieR Automata had too many cinematic aspirations and was a bit too heavily scripted to account for events in gameplay, such as death. Don't get me wrong, cinematic gameplay can be fine, and many of the scripted moments were great. Like the scene where Pascal takes over a giant mech and destroys an entire army of machines. That was fucking incredible! And the scene right after it where you have to decide what to do with a grieving Pascal begging for death? Whew, that is one of my top moments in gaming for how it puts the decision in your hands and has so many consequences for your actions. It's unfortunate then that part of my memory of that great moment is tainted by the fact that I died in the giant robot fight and then had to redo everything, killing the flow and punch of the emotional moment by having to do so. It was my goof, I guess, but for scenes like that, I sometimes prefer it when they're designed like Richter vs. Dracula in Symphony of the Night, or Samus vs. Mother Brain in Super Metroid, where you're given invincibility to echo the emotional high of the moment, gameplay and story working together, so that your victory lap is not ruined by unnecessary death and subsequent repetition. In the end, NieR Automata might have benefited from not being an action RPG at all. I know it sounds drastic, but part of game design is to pick the best genre to deliver your story in, and if so much of the action is scripted, and dying is so detrimental to the pacing and internal consistency of the story, then perhaps the game should have been made in a more safe, linear storytelling genre to fit better. Like a visual novel, for example, of which there are many cool sci-fi and existential ones that I like, such as 999 and Steins Gate. And heck, the series already shows it has great chops for this. And as for the RPG side of action RPG, well, that is its own can of worms. Using RPG mechanics in a game that traditionally doesn't have them can have a lot of positive effects. For example, getting abilities one at a time through leveling up can be a nice, fun way to subtly tutorialize the game. And heck, who doesn't love watching their numbers go up and getting some sweet loot?
I got hero challenge cards!
Yes! Loot! Yes! Loot! Oh, fuck, I love loot!
But on the other hand, I feel like numbers such as experience points don't always belong in an action RPG. After all, it's you, the player, getting more experienced at the game by learning enemy tells and reacting faster and attacking more confidently. And on the other side, enemies can more visually and logically show signs of experience by utilizing advanced movesets or donning a stronger appearance. In this way, experience points and levels can be a lazy, nonsensical device that creates a dissonance, an unnatural separation of an entity's skill from their bloated level-based stats. I'm sure we've all played an RPG and encountered at least one weird Monty Python rabbit situation where your hero, who has slain gods, can somehow be destroyed by an average mook just because they have a higher number above their head.
Holy oh. Man.
Experience points and levels can work if the game flows with them, grows with them. But in my playthrough of NieR Automata, I was constantly either underleveled or overleveled, putting me in this weird dissonant state where everything was out of whack.
Don't believe me? It's all in the numbers.
In terms of being underleveled, there were many instances in my playthrough, but nothing encapsulated the issue more for me than the side quest Lord of the Valley. In that quest, you're given the task to clear a valley of all the machines within it, machines which are much higher level than you at this point in the story. One machine in particular, the main target, is so much higher level than you that you can only damage it for a pitiful amount. Now, to be fair, I think it was designed this way on purpose. The quest alludes to the fact that the machine is suicidal and wants to die, but due to it being so powerful, it can't. And in theory, I think that's really clever to use levels to show this. But in execution, it didn't work for me. I tried, like many others, to take it down immediately despite being underleveled, but it took me forever. Seriously, like half an hour of constantly chipping away at it, and it wasn't exactly an exciting or emotional fight. No dialogue, no phase changes, no advanced moves, it was a slog, because it was just a regular copy-paste enemy leveled up to be a damage sponge. All the fun of chipping away at diamond with a stone pick.
Sweetest taste that ever was toasted. The sweetest taste. The sweetest.
I will at least say that this side quest was very memorable in its weirdness than the many other damage sponges I encountered in my playthrough, but all the same, I felt like it would have been better if it was just designed to be reasonably difficult at any point to preserve the intended emotional weight, instead of letting levels exacerbate the situation. Despite my gripes, I do want the fight to be a little bit of an ordeal to fit the story of killing a machine too powerful for death. But being underleveled turns it into an overly long slog, and leveling up or using hacking turns it into a cakewalk, both ruining, I believe, the intended experience. On the flip side, I had a real problem in the later part of the game with being over-leveled due to me doing all the side quests and using EXP chips. I already talked about how the game was too easy for me in general, and that kind of ruined my engagement with it since I didn't need to focus. Well, being over-leveled on top of that just took any remaining semblance of challenge from the game and slammed it into the dirt. I cannot begin to tell you how weird boss fights became due to being over-leveled. You see, NieR Automata has a real thing about making boss fights very chatty affairs. And it's not throwaway chatter. They can deliver some seriously important plot points mid-fight. So, me being a lore junkie, I want to hear it all. But if I take the boss fight seriously, I can destroy them in an instant with a snap of my fingers. So, I found myself constantly pulling my punches, running away, equipping underleveled weapons, whatever I could do to make them not die before they finished talking. It was bizarre.
Left behind act as if they wanted to be human.
And even when the fights weren't chatty and I could go ham without consequence, it'd still be very odd. I'd go into these fights and easily decimate an entire army without breaking a sweat. Then suddenly the following cutscene shows me all tired and worn out, like my high-level self couldn't kill a million more. So in both of these cases, I feel like RPG mechanics just serve to compromise the balance. You've got basic enemies becoming damage sponge gods, and you've got bosses becoming pathetic mooks. It's a total role reversal. Everything's topsy-turvy because of some arbitrary number over everyone's head.
So that's the solution, is leveling? Okay. So it's not a game. It's a you get more numbers and then you run in and numbers him and then that's it and then you win. So it's the skills. It takes skills. That's the skills of the game.
There are plenty of action RPGs which aren't ruled by numbers and are better designed for it. Take the Legend of Zelda series, which uses items, upgrades, and progressively harder enemies to create that same wonderful feeling of progression without needing experience points or levels to do so. And even if you'd argue that an RPG needs numbers to be an RPG, a game can be designed to work within that so as to preserve the intended experience, such as how Destiny 2 scales its content to your level so that no matter how big your level gets, enemies still take a certain amount of shots to kill, like a traditional FPS does, so you've still got to be skilled at shooting. You can't just outnumbers everything and potentially reduce the game into boredom. This is a little bit of a digression, but I feel like NieR Automata missed an opportunity to be creative here as well. There are games like Undertale which use RPG mechanics in clever, subversive ways to drive a point home. While you're usually inclined to kill and grind in an RPG to become more powerful, Undertale brings a whole morality aspect to it with the ability to spare enemies, despite it making the game more difficult by doing so, since you're not leveling up. Vampire does a similar take on it as well, where, while indulging in killing people to drink their blood might make you more powerful and able to fend off the ever-increasing threats, you feel like a right bastard for doing so. Both of these games create interesting moral dilemmas that are powerful, because they're not told to you, they're shown to you in gameplay. It subtly drives home the point that evil is tempting because it's easier than being good. When I played NieR Automata, my mind was blown when I did the side quest Jackass's Research. In it, Jackass discovers, from watching you fight, that androids have a hidden, programmed inclination to kill because it releases chemicals that make them feel good and blind them from the moral repercussions of it. At the end, you're given a drug containing those chemicals, which you can use for great power and pleasure at the cost of mental instability. I was like, whoa, is this what I think it is? That experience points are the feel-good chemical? That just like how Yorha dupes androids into fighting a war by injecting chemicals into them, I've been duped into killing peaceful machines because I can't resist the drug-like pleasure I get from leveling up? That, despite me wanting to be a pacifist at the start of my playthrough, I'm a bastard who's all talk, because I ended up killing machines all the same just to complete a quest.
You enjoy all the killing, that's why.
Holy shit! Is this what the game is implying? No. No, it isn't. At all. experience points and levels exist, and I quote from Yoko Taro himself, because this game is an RPG. All that happened in Jackass's quest is I got told that, oh, war is bad and endless and we need to do drugs to get through these hard times and so on and so forth. And that's nice, but I never felt it on a personal level, because the game did nothing to show this to me through gameplay. As mentioned before, the game was easy for me, so there was never a temptation to fall into abusing drugs to fight like other androids needed to. And sparing or killing machines didn't matter, because the story ignores gameplay and only ends up going one way. There are no choices.
There's always a choice. No, there's really not.
Look, I'm not trying to say, oh, my idea is brilliant, hire me, I should be a game designer. But still, I wanted them to do something. To show, not tell. There's so much potential in this quest, in this game. They had everything set up for an absolutely shocking revelation, and it was right in Yoko Taro's strike zone, examining violence in video games. And all that came of it is I got a little drug that makes my screen go wibbly wobbly if I use it.
Like, what the fuck? You had the T-ball set up. All you had to do was just whack the ball off.
So, yes. To me, RPG mechanics weren't used in any interesting or beneficial way, and I think they would be better removed, as they were just a shallow, unbalanced way of adding a repetitive grind to the game. And speaking of that, while NieR Automata was interesting enough with its story to keep me hooked all the way to the end, there were plenty of times where the repetitive nature of its gameplay tested my limits. I've already gone over some of the repetitive aspects that I played through in my previous topics. In addition, the combat, while fun, got a bit stale for me as the game went on, since I was basically fighting the same enemies from start to finish, just with superficial paint jobs and costumes in an effort to change them up. Similarly, much of the overall gameplay for me was, pardon me for being reductive, running circles around the same few locations I'd been in the entire game, and either listening to people talk, or watching a cutscene of people talking, or fighting while people talk. If I were to sum it up, the whole game was essentially the Romeo's and Juliet's side quest. Fun to watch and read, sure. But what's the gameplay except walking over to it to then sit and watch?
I don't really know what the point of this is. Like, what's the point? I feel like I'm just watching a movie.
But let's put that aside, because I wanted to touch on a few other elements that I felt were more egregious. That being the story having multiple routes and endings. Now look, this wasn't my first rodeo. I've played Drakengard, I've played NieR. I know that these games all like to use this whole you gotta play it multiple times to get the real ending business. And I know that, for people who love this game, the only thing they love more is to call out people who only play through to the first ending of the game as thick-skulled Neanderthals. And I know, technically, that comes from a place of love, a place of wanting to help people get the full experience. But that doesn't make it right. You can't complain that people find something confusing when that very thing is intentionally designed in a confusing manner. That's not how good game design works. In the words of Mads Mikkelsen, don't hate the player, hate the badly designed game. Simply put, I don't think there was a good reason for NieR Automata to A. repeat so much content, and B, end the game when the game was clearly not over yet. My main gripe is with Route B, the second playthrough as NieR, which started out well for me with all new scenes and gameplay, but it didn't take too long for it to end up making me repeat the same stuff that happened before, because NieR and 2B are together for a majority of the time. In the end, the only new content in the entire route was just a very small amount of solo NieR scenes, a couple of quips here and there, and a few weird cutscenes around bosses. There were some new side quests as well, yes, so there was an attempt to add variety to reduce repetition, I'll give them that, but I just didn't see why NieR Automata couldn't have just used some text transitions or fast forwards to get to the new important stuff, especially considering that's exactly what they do for the third playthrough. They don't make you play through everything all over again for that, thank goodness. Like, I do think there was potential in making the player do a whole repeat playthrough as NieR, but they didn't make the perspective shift dramatic enough to warrant it for me. The issue I had is that, while the story seems to imply that 2B is the ignorant, loyal soldier,
emotions are prohibited. Sorry, ma'am.
And NieR is the clever, rebellious truth seeker,
You're getting distracted.
Well, what do you expect? I'm a scanner. Combat was never meant to be my forte.
the game design did nothing to reflect that. To me, they pretty much saw the world in the exact same way. They played very much the same, despite NieR not being a combat model, supposedly.
Combat was never meant to be my forte.
And they both already shared skepticism and major reveals in the first route. So, I didn't get to see a major difference between their playthroughs. Functionally, it felt like I was playing as 2B again, just with a token hacking power added on. But imagine if this wasn't the case. What if when you played as 2B, you saw the world in a way that reflects her position? What if, because you're a combat android, your HUD reflected that by being filled with stuff like a combo meter, kill counter, rage mode, devil trigger, all that good stuff? Similar to games like Doom or Bulletstorm or Devil May Cry, which just makes you want to kill more and more like you're supposed to get a high score. What if when 2B sees the machines, she sees them as disgusting, violent monsters that are censored, just like the E-drug does, because she's been programmed by Yorha in that drug-like way to dull her emotions?
Machines are the enemy. Don't forget it.
And now you're playing as NieR. He's a scanner, not a fighter, so he leaves all the fighting up to 2B and can only hack to support her.
Thanks for the assist.
Oh, you mean the hacking? No worries. Us scanners are pretty good at that kind of thing. I've got your back anytime.
But as he hacks, he gets info in his codex about the machines and wipes away their sensors. And from this, he sees the machines as they really are. Cute, helpless little guys. Now you're learning the truth just like NieR is, and feeling conflicted all the same. Now maybe you walk up to the amusement park and see it's a friendly, peaceful place. And you feel guilty because when you played as 2B, you slaughtered everyone because they looked evil from her point of view, and you didn't know better. And why would you? You're not supposed to. If my suggestion sounds familiar, it's because the previous NieR did a very similar approach, which resonated with me greatly, where your second playthrough, by shifting the perspective, let you hear the voices of the monstrous shades. It let you now hear what you thought were mindless, bloodthirsty battle cries from monsters, but were actually only cries for help from intelligent beings defending themselves from your pointless slaughter. I didn't mind playing NieR a second time because it was so revealing in that route, due in no small part to how effectively it deceived me in the first route. The game was designed in such a classic RPG fashion, and the shades were so monstrous and unintelligible, it was easy for me to be deluded into thinking of myself as the hero on a noble quest to save my family from these savages.
Stay away from my daughter!
In comparison, as I stated before, I started NieR Automata as a pacifist almost immediately, because it could not stop dropping hints that these cute, innocent-looking machines who can speak to me are obviously not as evil as Yorha makes them out to be.
Androids flying. Fight.
What the?
Wow, this is weird.
Let's be happy together.
That machine had some pretty weird things to say, huh? It's almost like it had actual emotion.
The machines don't have feelings. You said that yourself.
Yeah, I guess.
Despite NieR Automata having literally blindfolded protagonists, I felt way more blindfolded in NieR. And he only had half a blindfold.
Knock it off.
It surprised me, because NieR Automata was very good at designing and pulling off twists in other respects. I went berserk alongside 9S when he was getting his memories stolen from him.
Stay the hell out of my goddamn memories!
Only to realize how I just unwittingly contributed to his further descent into insanity. I wish I experienced a twist as sublime as that for Route B. But I unfortunately didn't, which made it feel like such a pointless retread. To get one new scrap of information at the end that, unlike the characters, I had already known from the very start. And as for ending the game and rolling credits in between routes, it's an interesting artistic touch, but like I said before, it's unnecessarily confusing. If you do something so confusing that you feel like you need to explain it with a pop-up, it might not be a good idea in the first place. There are plenty of other games out there that also have dramatic perspective shifts in their stories, like Metal Gear Solid 2 and The Last of Us, and they don't roll the credits and send you back to the title screen when it happens. They just go straight into the next part because the game's not over yet.
It's not over yet!
It's a bummer because I want people to experience the full game. But looking at the achievement ratios and seeing the dip between first ending and last ending, I can't help but think that this confusing design choice, where Route B is so repetitive and the game rolls the credits for each route, contributed so much to that loss in retention. There are so many posts of people explaining, "Don't stop playing, keep going, don't stop," when they shouldn't have to. The game should make that obvious. The designers shot themselves in the foot, and for no good reason that I could see.
Bold, but risky. Try not to be so reckless next time.
Again, it's just my opinion based on my experience. I'm sure people could argue that everything was fine for them, and that, I don't know, the repetition was on purpose. That because the game is about an endless, pointless war, the game tries to deliver that message through endless, pointless gameplay. If that was the message that they got and it resonated for them, that's perfectly fine. Beautiful, even. I wish I could feel that way. but I would argue that it doesn't excuse the lack of engagement in the design.
I think, you know what I think, honestly? Because this part is so fucking infuriatingly boring.
No!
I think it was purposely boring.
What are you talking
to make you sort of empathize with Drake.
No, that's the point, but it's boring.
I know.
It's a game.
I feel there's a difference. Papers, Please is technically about a boring job doing paperwork, but it's not a boring game. To me, it's incredibly engaging because of the way it pushes you with constantly escalating moral dilemmas and complications within the so-called boring paperwork. Hades might technically be a game where you constantly loop through the same levels, dying over and over, but it keeps the engagement up by introducing new weapons, new keepsakes, and by having an endless supply of brand new events, dialogue, and interactions occur with each run. So much that it feels like you aren't looping at all, but rather playing a seamless story. Night in the Woods is all just talking, there's no challenge to its gameplay, but nevertheless I was engaged, glued to my seat, because the world was so rich with interactivity and charm. NieR Automata, to me, was just plain boring at times. It just made me want to rush through the gameplay to get to the new story bits, and when that happens, I'd say you haven't made a game at all. You've made a movie consisting of cutscenes. And I think that's a shame, because it's the absolute antithesis of what I want for games. As Yoko Taro stated in an interview, for a game, if the players are experiencing the same thing as someone who's just watching it on YouTube, I don't feel that is quite right. Now, hopefully you can see how my experience with NieR Automata went. The many ways I feel it was badly designed, and the many games we can look to for better design examples to draw from. But do you know what other game we can look for great design from? NieR Automata. That's right. Amidst my complaints, I've tried to pepper in moments from NieR Automata that I enjoyed, because they were moments that I search for, moments that Yoko Taro searches for, moments where games show their potential to deliver an experience that explores new frontiers. And when I played the ending to NieR Automata, I cried like a goddamn baby. I cried at the ending because it was a beautiful moment, a beautifully designed moment that no other medium could hope to replicate, because it was told through gameplay. And even more than that, it was a moment that took into account all of the complaints I just went through and rectified them with a vengeance. There is no confusion on the intended difficulty for the ending. It is hard. No ifs, ands, or options. It is hard because the designers know that only a dark and overwhelming gameplay challenge would serve to reflect the dark and overwhelming story of this last stand for a happy future. The difficulty pushes you, just like classic MMORPGs like EverQuest did, to realize you can't do it yourself, to reach out to others on the network for help, and create a moment of jolly cooperation. They know that a future is not something easily given to you. It is something you must fight hard to take for yourself. Death in the ending is not to be ignored or rewound from the actual timeline. The ending expects you to die many times in your attempts, and because of that, it is designed for it. It is not bogged down by load screens, by having to replenish your inventory, by having to walk all the way back to where you left off, or any of these time-wasting, immersion-jarring annoyances. The game keeps the emotional pace up by not only having death be quick and painless, but having death be part of the story by flashing you messages which serve to rile you up, raise your spirits, to have you try again and again until you reach the intended breaking point. The ending wisely removes all RPG numbers and mechanics from it, so that the player cannot unbalance the experience. Instead, all entities in the ending are hard-coded with certain strengths to ensure that they play their assigned role properly, to create universally consistent and recognizable moments in your challenging ordeal to beat the credits, such as the infamous appearance of the Square Enix credits, which Yoko Taro warned us about. Instead, the ending focuses on the real heart of RPGs, the joy of gathering your party and venturing forth, the companionship as you speak with other players, and the deep, thought-provoking, and meta-as-fuck choices that shape our moral alignment as you consider whether to sacrifice everything to save another person. Considering the ending is technically just a constant loop of death over a short and simple amount of gameplay, you would think it would be incredibly repetitive. But the game takes every measure to wipe that out. Anything that could be repetitive, such as the hard difficulty and the constant deaths, are paced well and kept fresh by the introduction of new, escalating revelations with each death and every piece of ground you fight for. The ending is not a sequence of separate, repeated runs until you get to the end. All of the runs form a singular experience, a long, seamless story of despair and desperation, followed by hope and triumph. And that soundtrack, when it kicks in, Keiichi Okabe, Mama, there goes that man. It must be tough to be a game designer. Their games, no matter how much effort or heart they put into them, are inevitably designed to be critiqued by any old schmuck like me who has the benefit of hindsight. They are caught in a never-ending spiral of creation and critique, so much that they probably wish they could kill the god that blessed them with this cryptic puzzle of a job. If it helps, I have a bit of a cryptic puzzle myself to solve. Did I hate NieR Automata? Or did I love it? I believe I loved the game. At least, I think so. I finished it after all. But as I was writing this, deciding what few core complaints and nitpicks to leave in from my long list, I wasn't quite sure. Because it wasn't the first time a game used an emotionally charged ending to try and brainwash me, to make me forget all the crap before it. So, was I tricked? Well, there are clues to support this possibility. Yoko Taro is known for a certain type of writing approach called backward script writing. Essentially, he starts with finalizing the ending and then works backwards to fill in the rest. I'm reminded of one of my favorite songs from They Might Be Giants, called Experimental Film. In it, the lyrics go, "In my experimental film, I'm still figuring out what's going to go in. I already know the ending, it's the part that makes your face implode. I don't know what makes your face implode, but that's the way the movie ends." To me, the song represents the overflowing yet reckless passion of youthful artists. They're excited to change the world, to get everyone involved in something new and fresh, to leave their mark on history. But they don't necessarily have the skill yet to do so. They focus on the end, the whole world cheering upon witnessing their great idea for an ending, not even thinking of the work it takes to build up to that. All climax, no foreplay. And the cynic in me thinks that this echoes my experience with NieR Automata, a fantastic and unique ending birthed from a great idea, but a jumbled, discordant pile of random philosophical musings and boring gameplay crammed in beforehand. But I know that's not my truth. While I say that my connection to the characters might not have been as strong as I felt it could have been due to the game design trips and stumbles along the way, clearly the game was nevertheless well designed enough to be able to forge a powerful bond. My tears during the ending were a testament to this, for the ending was intentionally designed in such a way to only truly resonate with a player, not a watcher. If I was not connected, immersed into the story and characters by the gameplay sufficiently enough, it would not have been an experience with that power over me. Even though my brain was conflicted, it was this result from my heart that I think that not only NieR Automata was a great game that pushes the medium forward, but that I loved it. Well, for the most part. What? Were you expecting a happy ending? Newsflash, I play Yoko Taro games. I live for ambiguity. But look, real talk. I was scared to put this video out. In the initial draft, I ended it by stating that I loved NieR Automata, that's it. And while that's partly the truth, it was because I felt like I had to, otherwise risk throwing myself into the lynch mob. And of course, I understand. It's the internet. A place filled with trolls, contrarians, and thick-skulled Neanderthals. And yes, I could see how people might think that I'm being overly negative or even bullying Yoko Taro. But that's not my intention for this video. I don't want this to be a tale of one side overpowering the other, of mindlessly upvoting positivity and mindlessly downvoting negativity. The reason I love Yoko Taro isn't because he's some sort of god of game design that everything he touches turns into gold. It's because he, like many other game designers, is humble and believes in collaboration, examining and sharing both the beautiful and frustrating aspects of games. They sacrifice themselves with their experiments not for personal gain, but for a cause. While they may not break down the wall themselves, at least their attempts might form a crack to guide future generations to finish the job. And I have sympathy for Yoko Taro. He's gone from a small cult hit to a multi-million-dollar success. While that's nice, fame isn't. It means increased expectations for a hit, increased pressure from publishers and fans, and consequently less freedom to explore and experiment. My dream, my hope for this video, which mostly slams NieR Automata while celebrating other games, is to have Yoko Taro rest assured that the weight of the world isn't on his own shoulders, because we're all here to carry it together.
The data transmissions, they're resonating with each other.
If you think my love sounds a little twisted and I didn't get that across,
That was a bit aggressive, don't you think?
well, I'm only human.
And being alive is pretty much a constant stream of embarrassment.
And, okay. With that, here's the happy ending. I wasn't hyped to play NieR Automata because I thought it was going to be the perfect game. I was hyped because I knew it was going to be a weird game for weird people like me. And unlike the unskilled youths I spoke of earlier, Yoko Taro, for his weird experimental game, made an ending that made my face implode. Wow, it's really over. When I started working on this, I thought it would never end. And yet now, I feel a slight amount of sadness. Well, it's time for the final words. To all of you who spent time with this video, thank you. Thank you for watching.